Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I can't see you terribly well. I hope you can see me. And you're also spread out across the room. I have been in the habit in the past of making everybody come up to the front, but I think I'll let you off. It's a big auditorium. Welcome to this session on collaborative innovation, doing more with less. I'm Philip Rycroft, as it says on the screen there, and it's my job simply to get you going this afternoon. I'm going to speak for 10 minutes or so, and then Nick Jankel's going to take over and take you through the rest of the session. So what I want to do is to give you my sense of why collaborative innovation is important for government now. A very short bit about me. I'm, since the beginning of last week, Director General Innovation Enterprise and Chief Executive of the Better Regulation Executive in the new department, Business, Innovation and Skills. I was briefly prior to that DG, Business and Innovation in DIAS, but that was for about 4 weeks, because prior to that I was working as Director General Education in the Scottish Government. So I've travelled a bit of a journey over the last little while, and hoping things are going to settle down now, and the job I've now got will last more than 5 or 6 weeks. But the bit that I've taken through over the time I've been down here is obviously the innovation piece. And I want to say a little bit, by way of introduction, why I think innovation is important. And one of the questions I've been asking myself is why innovation and why now? In a sense, this is partly about me justifying my job, but is, I think, an important question for us more broadly. And I've got 2 or 3 elements to the answer to that. The first element is around the expectations of the government, of government generally. And I think those expectations, driven partly by people's experience of what they get from the private sector, driven partly by their own ambition for themselves, for their children, is higher than ever. And let me just give you one quick example from my previous experience around all of this. One of my responsibilities in Scotland was around schools, and part of that was the support for children who need additional support for their learning. And what we think of as what was thought of as an adequate level of support 20 years ago is now not seen as an adequate level of support. Parents, teachers, the system as a whole is expecting that we do more and better for those kids now than we've ever done before. And I can see the trajectory of that over the last 20 years or so, as expectations, absolutely rightly, have risen for what government can do to help people in that sort of class. But you can spread that across a whole range of things that government does. So that's one, expectations. 2, which I don't need to bang on about very much, is the state of the public finances. And there's a very simple message there, it seems to me, that whereas over the last few years it was possible to spend new money achieving new things, the access to new money, as we all know, is going to be far more constrained, not just next year or the year after, but probably over the next half decade or beyond. So our capacity to buy new solutions is going to be very much more limited. The third element, which in some respects is the most interesting but also the most challenging, is the nature of the problems that we're facing. So much of what we do now in government is confronting complex issues, the so-called wicked issues. Many of them have been around for a very long time. Many of them have not been susceptible to improvement for all the things that we've done over the piece. The sort of things that I'm thinking of, the way that we support looked after children, for example, the way we deal with drug abuse and substance abuse more generally, issues around the ageing population, security issues, how the UK stays competitive in the global marketplace, dealing with waste, climate change. All of these issues are complex, difficult issues, and where it seems to me a simple message around all of this: if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. But the bigger challenge is that you could add to that or worse. If you look at the trajectory of some of these issues, and what government, not just in the UK, faces, but governments across the world, we can see that some of these issues are potentially taking us into some very interesting, some very risky, and some very dangerous territory. I listened to a presentation given by John Beddington, the Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, just last week, where he was outlining some of the implications of climate change for the globe, for the world as a whole. Some of that stuff is really quite scary, but that illustrates at an international level the nature and the challenge of some of the issues that we face. So you put those three things together: expectations, where we are with the public finances, the nature of the issues that we're trying to deal with. All of that makes the case, it seems to me, for innovation, okay, in the way that we go about our jobs in the public sector. But why the collaborative piece? Why do we add in that in terms of this session and thinking about innovation through that particular lens? Well, from the nature of the issues I've described, it seems to me that is pretty self-evident. Because these are complex issues, because of the nature of the issues, they're not susceptible to what I think of as one-shot policy solutions, a simple answer that leads to a simple cure. If it was simple, these problems would have been sorted out a long time ago. The fact that they haven't, and the nature of the problems, requires us to get into a different frame of mind when we're thinking about how to approach them. Now, the sort of collaboration that I think we're talking about here is not what you might describe as a traditional collaboration, which is where teams intersect at the intersections of their policy and they collaborate about where you see little bits of joint interest. It's what I think of as the teams that gather in traditional manner around a meeting table, and people bring their bags, put them on the table, and to some extent sit behind those bags and represent their narrow interest in that discussion while somebody else is trying to batter through to find a solution. The sort of collaboration that we need now has to be collaboration where the outcomes that we're seeking are absolutely shared by everybody in that collaborative space. And that is the way that we will, it seems to me, find a way forward on some of these more difficult issues. So common ownership of the outcomes, and that common ownership transiting all the way through, if you like, the chain down to those who are dealing with these issues at the delivery end. You can't manage these issues in isolation from those who have the experience of dealing with these problems at the front line. To do all of that is not simple. If it was easy, we'd have been doing it for years, okay? It is difficult stuff, and it requires us to think and act in rather different ways. And that is the nature of the session, the experience that Nick is going to take you through over the next little while. It's how do we get into a mindset that allows us to collaborate at those deep levels and do that in a way that brings innovative thinking, different thinking, to some of these really complex and difficult issues that we're facing. So that's my brief introduction. I hope that that's given you a sense of where we're coming from and the purpose of this session. This is meat and drink for me in the job that I'm doing now. So I think it's great that you've come here to participate in this session. And I'll be working with my team to see how we can help build the capacity, the capability across government to work in these different ways. Risky territory in some respects, but it seems to me risks that we absolutely have to take given the sort of nature of the issues that we're facing and what we have to deal with. Thank you very much for your time. Hand over to Nick, who is going to lead you through the next little while. Enjoy the session, and I look forward to seeing some great results from your collaborative working over the next little while. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to take you through a semi-experiential session, various different bits of media and things to do. The first thing I'm going to say is I spent a long time as an innovation consultant, and then 5 or 6 years ago realized that the much trickier thing to do is help people become more innovative. It's actually relatively easy to go into an organization like a Tesco or a public department and say, oh, there's the problem, here's a couple of ideas that we think might work out, see you later. What's much harder is to help people step into that kind of thinking themselves, particularly when there are so many vested interests and contradictory evaluations and measures going on at any one time. So for me, I very clearly believe that innovation is about leadership, as does Steve Jobs, perhaps the most innovative person on the planet at the moment, one of certainly a top 10 if you had to make a list. And therefore, leadership, as we know, is about mindsets. It's about how you think, which then reflects on what you do. So this session is actually going to be as much about how you think and who you are being in your day job, as it is, here's a couple of innovation techniques, because you can read about those and you can learn them and you can try them and you can get consultants to do those very easily. But collaborative innovation mindsets are much harder. So first of all, something completely different.
You see now, I'm here to tell you, this remaining silent shit ain't nothing like they make it out to be. You up in here all tight with it, waiting for your pay lawyer, thinking you all wise, ain't you? No, see? That work when you some kind of criminal mastermind, when you ain't been seen running from the deed, when your own fucking running partner ain't in the next room putting you in. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's telling it like a little bitch. We even went to Mickey D's for him because he was so motherfucking helpful. 2 quarter pounders, big fries, McDonald land cookies, Dr. Pepper. That's how your boy rolled, right?
All right, step out.
Where we going?
Break room. So you can enjoy that, huh?
All right, and I still ain't saying shit to y'all.
Yeah.
Come on now, what the fuck?
How many years?
So, for those of you that can't interpret Baltimore police chat, this is a young guy, young drug peddler, seen running from the scene of a crime, and has a criminal partner in the next room. And they're playing essentially a version of the prisoner's dilemma. Put your hands up if you've ever heard of the prisoner's dilemma, ever used the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, great. So the prisoner's dilemma is very, very simple, and it's essentially a test of our desire or willingness to collaborate or cooperate, and what we learn from repeatedly doing it over and over again. So the prisoner's dilemma is basically set up that the police arrest you and someone else. They do not have enough evidence to put you away for a very long time. If you say nothing, you'll both get 6 months. So if you say nothing. If one of you squeals, the other one will go down for 12 years, and you'll go to walk away scot-free. But if you both squeal, you'll both go down for 6 years each. This is the prisoner's dilemma. Now, I'm going to try something. I don't know if it's going to work. You have a little bit of a voting technology next to you. So everyone on this side of the room, you are going to be prisoner A. Okay? So down the sort of middle of here, you're going to be prisoner A. And you're going to collaboratively vote on what prisoner A does. You are going to be prisoner B, okay? And we're going to work out how many people stay silent, which is actually collaboration, or squeal, which is what they call defending or defense, okay? So what will you do? And I'm going to have to flip out to a slightly different bit of technology. Oh, it's almost actually working. So, A's, you've got a choice between pressing 1 or 2. Okay? 1 or 2. And B's, you've got a choice of pressing 3 or 4. Okay? So 1, for you guys, means say the other person did it, these guys did it. 2, you keep quiet. You guys, option between 3 and 4. So I'm going to press polling software. I believe this is going to work. In fact, you know what I'm going to do first? They've told me to reset the session. Right, so you can now vote. Now, of course, in the prison dilemma, you don't know what the other person's doing. So it's kind of got a slightly bizarre situation going on. Okay, and tell me what I'm going to do now. I'm going to, that's the first time. So you both kept quiet. Very wise. 6 months each. Right. Now, I'm going to reset again. Now, I'm not going to show you what's happening. We're going to do it again. Now, so now vote. Last takers. Okay, so, just carry on going, carry on going. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop there because we don't really have time to do it. What tends to happen is people start off quite jolly, and then as soon as one person defends, it starts to spiral, and everyone defends every time. And what actually happens is, if you do this with a monetary game instead of a kind of prison game, the bank always wins, i.e., Her Majesty's Prison Service always wins, which you may think is a good thing. But essentially it means that even our best intentions to collaborate often turn us into being defensive, essentially. So, we're now in everyone's talking about a new age of collaboration. Pretty much prompted by the eruption in things like Twitter and Facebook and Flickr and all the kind of what they call Web 2 technologies. It's kind of created this whole ethos of collaboration. And if you want to Twitter or tweet any of your thoughts about this session as it happens, which would be great, if you have got an account, you just send a text message with that code in it, and it will come onto the general civil service live sessions. So what is this era of collaboration about? Well, we heard a little bit about from Philip. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail. So, as we've heard, there are definitely, without doubt, fewer natural resources to go around. That's causing pressures, maybe less so in the UK, but certainly in places like the West Bank, certainly in places like the Colorado River. There are definitely pressures coming from this. Smaller budgets, and as we both of them might have spoken about, and most people now realize, whoever's in government next year is going to have to radically cut spending because basically the UK is essentially bankrupt, or very close to bankrupt. There's also more complexity, far more for any one person to know about at any one time, far more. And what tends to happen is people become very specialist. So if you go and meet an academic who knows a lot about, say, First World War history, they might know no more than a secondary school kid about ancient Rome. Literally. That's how specialized we are now, because that's the natural response to complexity. We all have less time. There are more technologies available. Every minute, another one comes online that we have to go, is that going to help us? Is that going to hinder us? Is it a waste of money? Is it going to save us money? More innovation resources. There are more types and elements for innovation, but there are also more vested interests. I think that someone told me the other day there are 1,000 quangos in the UK at the moment. That's a lot of vested interests to be going around. Add in the number of civil sector organizations, social enterprises, charities, all fighting for the same pound to do the good work. And you have a lot of people fighting for very little. You've got more networks, or rather the networks you've had are now more obvious to you. So you can start to go through things like Basecamp and find new people within your department or without who are interested in things you're interested in. More distributed knowledge. Hopefully everyone knows what that is. So knowledge is now distributed throughout the network, not just in silos. More access to what's called the long tail. So all the people who've got just one thing of interest to talk about, you now have more access to them, and they have more access to you. Cheaper transaction costs, which means before, big ministries and big departments were a fabulous way of organizing things so that transaction costs were less. Get everyone together in one place, it costs you less money. Now that's not necessarily true. And in fact, it usually costs you more money to have an institution than it does to have distributed resources through a system. You've got more empowered citizens, again, we heard, who want more. If Nike can give me innovation every few weeks, or Henny's, why can't my public services do the same thing? And more pressing challenges. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on out there at the moment. And although we talk about these platitudes, many people working together helps solve problems quicker than one person, one genius person working alone. So the start point is, if you want to learn how best to collaborate, you're going to have to learn how to be collaborative, which is not really a very valued thing in British society. We haven't valued it very much in the last 20 or 30 years. I wasn't taught anything like collaboration at school in any way, shape, or form, unless you're on the sports pitch. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of collaborative social innovation, but of wildly different types. One is a very interesting story that looks at some work done on disappearing tribes deep in the Amazon. One's a story about global warming in the Midwest of the US. And then closer to home, a possibly more known story about some work that's been going on in Sunderland. So this guy is the leader of a 200-person tribe called the Surui tribe in Amazonia, near Rondônia, right deep in the heartland of Brazil. And he teamed up with, I think that's now the world's largest market cap company, Google, to do some social innovation, some public innovation. The story is, there's a couple of hundred of these guys still left. They only had their first contact with the world 30 years ago. So it's just kind of like, recent history. There are in the same areas, and there are 340 sawmills and over 4,000 loggers, and people get killed every day. We've all heard stories of Brazilian nuns, I'm sure, who get shot by loggers in the middle of the Amazon. It's kind of like the wild, wild, wild west. 11 chiefs have been killed in the last couple of years. And this guy went to San Francisco to meet with Google, which is quite a radically innovative thing to do. And they now use solar-powered laptops, Google Earth, and GPS systems to track where the loggers have been doing their logging illegally and to uphold injunctions against them. So I'll show you a little picture of this collaboration in effect. Here's the area we're talking about. This is from Google Earth. You can check this out if you download it onto your PC. And this is the area that they monitor to show any form of entrance into protected lands. This is a very, very, very recent example of 2 of the smallest and largest types of organizations on the planet working together to make things better for all of us. Another example, very interesting organization that works in these states in the US. So the guy who runs it, a guy called Rick Reed, very interesting character. Basically, it's a collaboration of people interested in cutting down emissions by 80% by 2030. This is what the world scientists now estimate is the number of emissions, the amount of emissions we have to cut to prevent one-way permanent damage to the biosphere. It's a lot. And rather than wait for government to do it, an organization called the Garfield Foundation, which is a charity, not-for-profit in the States, gave $1 million for 20 NGOs to sit together for a year. Nothing was done. There were no outcomes to measure. And for that year, they engaged in collaborative systems thinking to work out what is actually going on. One of the premises I start with is how can you solve problems when you don't really know how the system works? So how can you solve all these wicked problems when we don't really know how people are actually thinking and doing in real life? So they sat down for a year. Now, I've never heard of anything like this in Europe, this amount of investment in getting things right with the people who actually do things on the ground who are doing. And they discovered and agreed 4 leverage points within that system. So all these now have gone up to 50 NGOs and various different civil sector organizations. Rather than them all just doing their own thing, fighting to go, hey, we're better, no, we've got an extra staff now, no, we have. They decided to focus on these 4 points only. They've now got 50 NGOs involved. They've got $10 million more funding. But more interestingly, they've had a $100 million wind farm commissioned in the area. 4 of the 7, now 8 states' governors have signed up to make this happen, which is big news. And they've tied up in the law courts 5 dirty coal plants from being created. I reckon they'll never, ever be created because they'll have to go through so many legal loopholes. And this is all from a $1 million investment. But what the interesting thing about this story is that they spent the time investing in collaboration. And I've worked in this area for social innovation for now 6 years, and I hear a lot of people saying, go and collaborate. I hear people from the charity saying, oh, we know someone doing something similar to you. Why don't you go and collaborate with them? But there's no thinking about the funding and the resources needed to collaborate. It takes time. Nothing happens at the beginning. You can't show results immediately, but the results you eventually show can be significantly greater. And then closer to home, make it work. Does anyone know this example? A consultancy called LiveWork, I believe, worked with Sunderland and the Regional Development Agency. And basically, the story goes, there are 6 million people where no one is working in the UK, 13 billion. And in Sunderland, they reckon it's 26% of the working age population, and I imagine that's probably gone up. So a lot of people got together. So you've got the RDA, the council, and practitioners, people involved, invested, and they worked out a kind of joined-up solution. And the solution has been, the interesting bit, the kind of economic bit, is DWP states that it's rational for the public purse to spend £62,000 to get the average person off of incapacity benefit and into work. And these guys were getting a cost of £5,000, which is radically less. It's 10% of the costs. So local collaborations work as much as great big grand collaborations. So hopefully we all know intuitively that collaborative innovation is going to deliver us better results than silo-based innovation. But what I want to do now is start talking about the mindsets that are needed to be developed. I'm going to just drop 5 or 6 nuggets of insight from recent research, recent science, that might help you start to think about what collaboration really means. So the first thing is collaboration actually usually does not succeed. In fact, I'm going to do a little straw poll without the clever bits. Who's worked in a collaboration, a true collaborative innovation project that was fabulously successful? Put your hand up. Not many. Who feels they've been burnt from a collaboration that went awry at some point in their career? About the same. So it depends. Who actually feels they've worked in a collaboration, whether it was good or bad? Okay. And all those who didn't vote, was it kind of okay? Did it work out okay? Yeah? Okay. So when you do a poll of people who collaborate, most people say their collaborations don't work. And they end up usually one of these 3 outputs. So, output 1, one person takes control and becomes essentially a despot and rules a supposedly collaborative project and just does it the way they wanted to do it. Possibly worse, no one does that, and people turn up for meetings, it dwindles, a few more meetings happen, particularly if it's something that's off agenda, it's not quite something you're measured on, it's not quite something that's core, and just people turn up and then no one's there and it's really sad and depressing. Gone. And occasionally you get these spectacular outputs where the forces of repulsion of egos and just work styles are so awful, the whole thing explodes and becomes really ugly. Try and tidy it away under the carpet. So the first thing to say is collaboration is not easy. And what I talk about is collaboration is the one area where you need to talk about human beings. Human thinking, human feeling, human doing. You can't sweep it away with policy talk. Excuse the audience. But you can't. It's real stuff. People get pissed off. They get hurt. They get excited. Then they get their ideas walked all over. Then you've got to come back in and go, no, there's a better reason I'm doing this. It's not just about me. And they have to go through that process and ideally learn from it as you go along. Next thing, people talk about collaboration doesn't work because actually inherently we're selfish. We've all read things about the selfish gene. Well, recent research shows that actually this may not be true. So these are vampire bats, and vampire bats show a form of collaboration where if one hasn't eaten in 24 hours, which usually means it will die, it gets fed by other bats. Not necessarily the ones who are genetically linked to it, just by other bats in the colony. Which is very interesting. What becomes more interesting is those bats who didn't give food when they had plenty don't get food when they have none. There's a form of collaborative punishment for not getting involved and not giving up what you think is yours. Recently, very interesting research from the Max Planck Institute showing that chimpanzees and toddlers who have not been socialized yet both instinctively try and help researchers when they drop something. The chimpanzee will lift it up, or the child will lift it up, which kind of contradicts the feeling that we are inherently selfish until religion, school, our parents tell us not to be. So this is quite interesting. So maybe we actually have a natural propensity to this. And now Charles Darwin, who gets a lot of bad stick for his beliefs about evolution and survival of the fittest, actually in his third book said, in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. And I would say collaborate and improvise is what collaborative innovation is about. Altruism, which is a part of what collaboration is about, wanting to do something for the greater good, now they think might be hardwired into the brain, because recent research shows that when people give money or time, more with time than money, funnily enough, which is interesting, hits the same pathways that respond when you eat or have sex, the reward centers of the brain. They call it the helper's high. So the more you give, the more you give, the more you give, the more it actually starts to create some real tangible neurological pleasure. And this is very interesting research from the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies in California. A professor called Paul Zak has done some economic research showing that if you increase the trust within a network by 15%, and don't ask me how they did this, you can look it up online, it raises per capita growth 1% for every year thereafter. Now we know this intuitively. Trust is the most important part of a network. So it's an important part of, I talk about the most important collaboration in anyone's life is going to be their life partner, particularly if they have kids. Because you're collaborating on a project. You've innovated, and now you've got to collaborate every day to innovate further. And it really isn't easy. And trust is the most important thing. And I don't know about you, but I don't sense in Britain today a great deal of trust as a community, as 60 million souls trusting each other or not. I feel there's actually a lot of lack of trust. So maybe one of the things you have to think about in your departments and in your areas is how do you increase the trust in the network? Now, Facebook and other places, people like that, they do it through rating systems. There's a lot to be learned from the online world. How do you get people feedback on who is good to collaborate with and who isn't? Who gives and who takes? Who takes the blood, who doesn't give the excess blood when they have it? Again, another bit of interesting research that's come out recently. There's a whole sort of excitement about the co-op movement, which has been around for a long time, 150-odd years, and invented in Britain. We have the largest number of people in cooperative unions in the world. Japan's number 2. They've now researched that after 10 years, 62% of cooperative businesses are still in business versus 44% of private sector businesses, where it's all about the shareholder return. This is interesting stuff. This is showing that we actually might operate better when we work together. And finally, a bit of research from Harvard University. Recently, very, very recent stuff. It was a New Scientist about 3 months ago, showing that things like obesity and alcoholism are actually more likely to be passed on through our friends and our network than they are through our parents or through genes. That one insight alone, for me, is exceptionally important when we think about policy work. Forget your internal collaborative cultures. What's the forces of the network on the people that you are trying to essentially improve their lives to whichever way it happens? So network thinking is very, very powerful. So here's the question I asked you to think about for a few seconds. You could talk to someone next to you and share it if you wanted to, if you were collaboratively inclined. What ideas from your past, well, let's broaden the question. What ideas from how business is done as usual in the public sector might one have to let go of if you're going to collaborate most effectively over the next 5 years, where budget cuts will mean that people go, departments go, things can't be done like they used to. So have a think about some of the ways that business is done. And it would be great if you turned to someone next to you and just shared some insights about how it's done. Come on, you're born to collaborate. Let's do it. Connect? Go on. Do me a favor if you don't want to do it for yourself. So, let's move on. Some shout out some of the things you have to let go of. Some of the cultures. What's that? Open up information. Very interesting today. This month in a magazine called Wired magazine, there's an article, it was last year, it was in Wired, if you can look online. Obama's hired a new chief information officer whose job is to make available as much as possible of the data that the entire US government holds, in a safe, secure way, of course, and allow the private sector, entrepreneurs, to work out ways of using the data to make the world a better place. That's an interesting way of looking at information. And there's one example from the District of Columbia about using maps and data from arrests and drunkenness. It's called Stumble Home, and it's a way of helping people who are drunk too much get home safely. Which shows a small little idea, but someone just took the information, did a mash-up, scrunched it together, and out pops a public service. Probably cost them a few £1,000s. Any other thoughts? So, open up the information. What else?
Ministers competing for budgets.
Sorry?
Ministers competing for budgets.
Absolutely. Big problem, obviously, is if you can't collaborate literally where the head of the system works, how can you expect the rest of the system to collaborate? It's not going to be possible. And one of the things that we'll talk about later is a way of getting over that is what Churchill did very well, which is create essentially a war footing. So everyone has one thing to focus on rather than my thing to focus on. Now, how do we do that? Maybe the environmental crisis will do that for us. It's very possible. It will create collaboration because we are so concerned about our survival. This is the one thing that's great about crisis, is it creates a focused mind. There's one over here.
If we're working in other organisations, who does the channels? Do the bosses or allow people out to get the links up?
So it's getting the communication going this way as well. Absolutely. Well, I mean, there are lots of tools now. Basecamp is one of them. Biz have got that going on to connect people this way, horizontal connections.
So you've got to start working horizontally outside of civil servants and other agencies.
Absolutely.
Local government, private sector, voluntary sector.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Horizontal thinking. And actually writing an article on that at the moment, because it's not just about, it's horizontal thinking in a big way. How do we think about business models that are horizontal? How do we think about public service delivery that's horizontal? And how do we get out of this Victorian mentality of specialization and start to be more generalists again? So we have a little bit of understanding about a few things, and we can bring in experts and geeks, but we've got this breadth of understanding. And as an innovation consultant who has made my life about innovation, I only can do it because I read so far and wide that I have a little bit of information, enough to go, I remember something about that. I don't need to know all of it, but I need to know the person who it was who can bring them in. So horizontal thinking is really powerful. What else do you have to let go of? Old ways of doing.
Relax data protection.
Yes, don't know who said that, but yes, definitely. Some more intelligent and wise, I guess, way of looking at data protection. And how to get that this horizontal movement. Anything else?
Don't be afraid to say no.
Very important.
We spend so much time stretching ourselves saying yes to everything, nothing ever gets done.
very interesting insight. Too many things going on, too much yes, not enough focus, and not enough time to make one thing really happen. Hence this thing about this idea of a crisis gets everyone thinking about just the one thing. There's a way that I believe senior commanders in the army use mission command. There's one thing we're going to do. Forget all the other stuff we want to do as well. This is the one thing you got to do. So when you're in a crisis and someone's firing on you, the only thing that's in your head is, this is the one thing I got to do. Not fourth on the list was this, and should I prioritize that? I don't, which is great nuanced insight.
But sometimes you've got to say yes when your natural instinct is to say no.
Very good, very interesting. You want to say no because I don't need that. I don't want to do that. It's nothing to do with me. I won't get rewarded for, or I won't get rewarded for it, or it's too risky. Two competing issues. And someone later here said about reward structures, didn't you? You mentioned. Yes. Yes. Which is contradictory. Yes. There you go. We have been brought up on competition as the way to create success, which is a very old belief in the kind of capitalist mentality, and it's permeated through everything. Yeah. Oh, it's the default way of doing things. Listen, we're going to move on, but so those are some of the things to start letting go of. And as I remember from one of the first days I ever did anything to do with innovation, Edward de Bono said, the problem's not in getting the new ideas in, it's about getting the old ideas out. And the analogy I think he used, or someone used in my formative years, was if you've got a room and you want to get some new furniture in, well, you can't get it in if there's old furniture in it. You've got to get on eBay and sell your old furniture first. So, little doing collaborative innovation experience. Oh, have we got some sound? Back up.
In 1972, a crack commando unit was sent to prison by a military court for a crime they didn't commit. These men promptly escaped from a maximum security stockade to the Los Angeles underground. Today, still wanted by the government, they survive as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A-Team.
Why did I put that up there, you might ask? Apart from the fact they are the people to call if you've got a problem, and the fantastic music. Those four characters, the four characters in the A-Team, have been derived from four key archetypes based upon the work of Jung, which you can use in leadership work to really understand the different roles within collaboration. Because one of the great things about collaboration is you don't all have to be the same. You don't all have to be brilliant. And in fact, as one a non-exec from my first company said to me, if you had a company all made up of you, it would be the worst company on earth and it wouldn't work. That's what I kind of secretly wanted. But it wasn't going to work. It would never have worked. And I learned that very early on, that you need different types. And those four characters actually betray four very deep-rooted archetypes. I'm going to talk you through them now. I would like to reflect, as we're going through them, on which one you are. Because if you know which archetype you are, and not forced into a role that you don't really fit with, you will be able to perform better. It's that simple. So, the first one is Hannibal, the captain. And what the captain does is create vision, and if there's a problem, create a new context to encompass the problem. That's what great visionaries do. Problems become another way of framing the vision, the mission. And obviously balance teams. Now, the other part of this archetype work, which is always a little less pleasant for some people, is for all the kind of archetypal strengths you've got there. Everyone goes, yeah, that's me. Oh, I'm so that person. There's also what I call the mirror archetypes. And the mirror archetypes are, as you might imagine, what happens when you put this character in the mirror. And usually it's driven by fear. And the one thing we know about collaborations is they make us quite fearful. Someone else has got the ideas. Someone else might be more brilliant than us. Someone else might get more money than us. Someone else might crush my thinking. They make us fearful. When we're fearful, we operate in slightly bizarre ways. So the mirror of the captain is a teenager. Childish and petulant, looks after themselves, and wanders off from the group, but kind of secretly wants everyone to go, oh no, where have you gone? Come back, we love you. Now, if you're not that person, you know someone who's like this. Could be your boss, an old boss, because it tends to be a leadership role. Very powerful, got to watch some of those behavioral patterns. The next one, Murdoch type person, an architect, a builder, can transform problems. Very useful person to have in your team. And they tend to have a lot of tools. So I tend to be this. This is my kind of core archetype. I'm a problem solver. I've collected hundreds of tools from all different areas, and I can use them like this, and I'm a very useful person to have around. However, when I'm in my not-so-great place, I become a saboteur. I use those tools to find the one weak point in every other person's idea and go, ah, ha, ha, see? It's not going to work because X, because Y. And again, I'm very good at that too. So whenever I feel myself riling at things and people and ideas, I know that it's not my most powerful part of me coming out. The peacemaker, again, fabulously useful person to have. This is the face man, the nice guy, the nice person. Solves disputes, kind of calms people down, connects people to others, and helps people understand their motivations. Because often the architect, busy way fixing things, doesn't understand why it's not getting done, gets stressed out. And this person goes, oh, don't worry, it's because they're like, oh, right, okay, I understand, they've got something going on at home, or whatever it is that's going on. However, the peacemaker, when fearful, becomes flaky and calculating. And essentially will flip between different parties within the collaboration depending on who looks like they're going to win. Which is not very helpful. And finally, you've got B.A. Baracus, a champion. The person you can send out and go, fight the battle for me. Fabulous person to have on the team. Says what needs to be said, doesn't worry about the consequences. But can become very needy and cowardly and drains energy and moods. My old innovation boss from many years ago said, if you work in change, which I guess most people in policy do at some level, you've got two options. You can be a radiator or a drain. And when you're collaborating, if people start becoming drains, and people going, oh, I'm not getting out of this what I wanted to get out of it, etc., the energy just disappears from the group. And it takes a lot to get it back. I was actually asked to put an understanding of why. Those little animals, you may not notice it, are geese. And this is the logo that we use for our work. And I just thought I'd tell you an interesting thing about geese, which you may know. They share the leadership role. One goose will be at the front, and when they're tired, because they take a slipstream for everyone, they create a slipstream for everyone else, it rotates. They have a peer-led leadership system, which is very different from our leadership system. So we use geese as a way of understanding how to learn from nature. So back to the voting widgets. If you pick one up, let's just get a read on the room of which of these archetypes you think you are. So are you a captain, an architect, a peacemaker, or a champion? Don't do it yet. Sorry, I've got to do my Tom Pokery, which seems to be, oh, IP configurations don't sound good, do they? Let's see. Okay, here we go. Don't do anything yet, please. Question 2. Okay, I'm going to open the polling now. So, are you an architect? Sorry, A, a captain, B, an architect, C, a peacemaker, or or D, a champion? Let's have a look how that looks. Okay. Ah, interesting. There could be lots of different reasons why you have that kind of split in a room. People changing their mind, or just more people voting. So architects are probably more prevalent, not surprising, in an innovation session. So you'll be more taken by that than something to do with HR, for example. Captains, this is interesting. I often find this when I do this kind of training. This is usually a training session, this sort of bit of it. And when I do this kind of work, people tend to not want to think they're captains because it sounds like, oh, I'm not the captain kind of character. But you are out there. You are out there. So thank you for being honest and candid with yourself. Now, here's the great news. The more developed you become as a leader, the more you can do all of them. Because ultimately, the big win is to become very proficient at one and pretty good at the rest. And because you might not have someone who's a champion on your group. If there's 5 of you, it's likely you won't. And someone's got to fight those battles. Someone's got to get things done. Someone's got to go out there and be the champion for your cause. And if you don't want to do it because you're too busy being nice to everyone, nothing's going to happen. So you need to be able to be flexible with these things, which is why collaborative innovation and leadership work are the same thing. I don't mean leadership as a pay grade. I mean leadership as a mindset, a state of mind. So, very little, tiny little session because we haven't running out of time. So, I'd love you to form into a group just around you, like those you 4. If you could be a little group, and just form into a group, a bit interactive. And we're going to do a little bit of innovation work now. First of all, say which archetype you are and why you think that. Choose a live problem that one of you is working on. Then, very simple, it's not really an innovation technique I'm teaching you, just something to talk about your archetypes with. Stick within your role. Don't start going off into other roles. Stick within your role and just see how it works. Drill down to the core assumptions within the problem. Really important part of collaborative innovation. And we're going to talk about the 7 tips at the end. Tip 1 is, it's very likely that none of you have the same model of the world. None. You all believe social change happens from different reasons. You all believe people get back on the path to prosperity for different reasons. Until you understand how you all think, there's no real point in starting to work together. Because when one person says X, you'll be thinking it means Y, and wondering why things aren't happening. So drill down to the core assumptions, quickly pull your ideas, and if you can, form a joined-up solution from across horizontal thinking. Literally 5 minutes, because then we'll do 10 minutes on the 7 tips for collaborative innovation. So 5 minutes if you go off and do this thing just in your little groups. If there's 3 of you, don't worry about it. If there's 7 of you, fabulous. I know it's interactive. I know it demands something. If you do nothing else, just talk about the archetypes you play and how they work for you or against you. If you do nothing else. Okay, so you won't have had time to get really into this, but one of the things that I see happening a lot when hosting collaborative spaces and when training people on collaboration is you tend to get tension arising. And again, my experience of British organizational life, tension is not often discussed or talked about or even acknowledged. So what tends to happen is for the length of the project, let's say 40% of the energy goes into ignoring the tension. Could be higher. And trying to get through different people's briefcases, I think Philip used that analogy, on the table. And only 60%, if you're lucky, goes on actually innovating. And I call it sediment. Sediment grows like a river. So at the beginning, everyone's like, fabulous, don't know who these people are. It's great. We're going to do a joined-up service for Doncaster's health service, so the user gets to have this experience wrapped around them. Isn't this wonderful? 5 months later, you have a set of opinions about every single person you're collaborating with, and if they're not discussed, it becomes sediment. And sediment, we know, blocks rivers from flowing. So one of the things I think that that if I could leave one thing with this conversation and this discussion today, would be if we're going to collaborate, you've got to get serious about it, and you're going to have to increase the collaborational intelligence of everyone who does it. That means being able to talk about your roles where you're not so strong, who we need in the room to match up, to fill in the gaps. What do you think about people in a way that's constructive and open? And the fact, as we'll talk about in a second, there's nothing wrong with that tension thing. So these were 4 sample problems I was going to give you, which are very live, real problems right now. You can read through them and amuse yourself at the task at hand. So here are questions that I like to ask at the end of a session. These are probably unlike most outcomes you read in HR reviews. So, did we as a team collaborate to create the best outcomes that we could for the end user? Not for our part of the process, not for our wins, but for the user. Did we tap into our combined talents and encourage each other to hone them as we develop? Did we support each other whilst pushing each other to the utmost? Did we learn from our combined mistakes, ready to make new ones next time? Nothing is more frustrating and boring than making the same mistake over and over again with a different group, a different team, a different boss. It's such a waste of time, and we don't have the time. And this is an interesting question. Did we stand together even during the toughest moments? Now, can you imagine if that was part of your review process, those kind of questions? What that would cause in the behaviors people show within collaborations. And as an old believer that what happens is what gets measured, then if we're not measuring collaborative skills, you're not going to get collaboration. It's not going to happen. Impossible. So I want to finish up with 7 tips to boost your collaboration IQ. And there are going to be some young work experience type dudes out there, 4 of them, who we've had some cards printed with these 7 tips on them, which are actually, I think, more useful than they might seem at first glance. So they're worth picking up and having in your bag. And you can see the logo. That's that thing outside. So, a hero of mine, one of the designers, innovator, Buckminster Fuller, the guy who invented the geodesic domes and many other things. He said, all of humanity now has the option to make it successfully and sustainably, as before his time, because we all have minds, most of us anyway, check. We can discover principles, and with those principles, we can do more with less. So these are 7 principles that I've spent a lot of time putting together by working with people who have collaborated to successful and less successful degrees. So, first one we talked about already. I cannot recommend this enough. People won't want to do it. I think it's boring. I think it's a waste of time. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Explore how everyone thinks the world works before you start trying to tinker with it. If you walk straight into your car engine without knowing how it worked and went, I've got an idea, slammed something on the carburetor, it's very unlikely to work. Yet we do it all the time in public innovation. All the time. And one of the things I believe personally is systems thinking. Not necessarily big, complex systems, consultants coming in with all, but just a very light form of how's the whole thing working? How do people think within the system that's making it work that way? I look for assumptions and myths. That's what I look for. So I actually, if anyone's interested, I run a networking group you can find on Facebook, informal, called Disruptive Social Innovators. It's how you do disruptive innovation in the social space. So how do you do iPods in the social space? And the things we do when we look at our systems maps, because we use systems maps, is we try and find the assumptions, the mind assumptions, that are causing the system to work the way it does. And that's where we start to innovate, right at the heart of the problem, not the externalities, which are obviously much easier to look at because they're there. They're easier to measure, but one of the reasons we might have some of these wicked problems is because we're not actually looking at the real issues. We're looking at the things that have been more convenient to solve. Second thing, very difficult to do, openly, from the very beginning, state your vested interests. So, for example, I need this project to look good for me because I've had a couple that haven't, and that's what I'm really looking for at the moment. Shock horror. Everyone thinks candid or what. But that's the kind of things you need to know. If you know that, there's nothing wrong with it. You go, great, well, I know this guy really needs this to work, so he's going to feel X, Y, and Z. Or I know this lady really needs to win another £500,000 funding for her department. That's what she's going to be looking for. Great, well, we can incorporate that into what we're doing. But if you don't know it's there, it's going to cause problems. And the other thing, which seems to be like a kind of additional thing, but whenever you hear people talking about me, mine, or more, you know you've got a problem. And one of the things, I read this thing on the internet the other day, it said the one most important word in the human language is we. And the difference between we and I. Look for win-win-wins. They do exist. They're not just a myth. There are ways to get me benefiting from my life, my career, because we all have careers and we all want to make sure that we go home maybe with more praise or more money or whatever it is that works for us, more interesting projects, whatever it is. I can win, we can win, and the end user can win. Might take a bit longer to get there, but they do exist. Again, a bit more preparation time. You're going to have to put time into getting a vision that works, a vision that transcends individual needs. If you don't have that, you won't be able to transcend individual needs. Really pretty simple. And I don't know many projects that start off with a month of visioning. Visioning is not fluffy. It's the most important thing we can ever do as a leader. And quite simply, if we can't see what we want to create, how are we going to create it? Every single thing that we see in the world around us that's not from nature was once an idea in someone's head that they wrote down and drew. This stuff, all of it. So if you can't see it, you can't create it. And the second thing you've got to prepare to invest in is systems and spaces that encourage collaboration to happen. A space, a room, a project room, an ideas thing online, whatever it doesn't matter, but you're going to have to create it, otherwise you won't get collaboration. The powers of the vertical are too strong unless you start to create horizontal thinking. Agree everyone's roles. I don't mean they're archetypes. These are useful things as a leader to be able to use. They're roles. You are going to do X, Y, and Z for this bit. We won't do that. So whenever we get to anything that's like this, you're going to do it. And I'm going to write it down so we all know right now that that's the case, not decide 9 months later that you thought you didn't do that little bit there and that's why it hasn't been done. So write it down and make sure in that vision that everyone gets something from playing their role to the full. You can see already it's quite a potentially onerous task to make collaborations work. It's not business as usual. Trust. We talked about how important trust is. Trust is what makes Facebook work. It's what makes Twitter work. 250 million people on Facebook in a year and a half. That's a lot of numbers, a lot of people. So, got to clear away the sediment. You have to get people's frustrations and angst out. Otherwise, they will just sit in the system that you're working and they will start to pollute it every day. Again, not an easy thing to create, but someone's got to pierce the, oh, nothing's happening, it's all good, it's all good. Pierce that lie, essentially, and start to create what we call here an environment of deep accountability. And then finally, and really importantly, collaborations really can be a challenge for the mind and the heart and the soul. And if you start from the beginning and understanding that collaboration is going to stretch you, stretch every individual within it, and have that as part of the discussion, the debate, the process, you'll find that in those moments when you're like, I cannot work with this person again, I cannot do it, I just want to go off and leave this project, I can't be doing with it. In those moments, you remember, it's meant to be like this. It's meant to be tough. It's meant to pull out of me the bits of me that I haven't developed yet. It's meant to reflect on me the bits of me that aren't working so well in a group setting. So, as Brian Eno, who's an arch collaborator, if anyone's interested in music, says, every collaboration helps you grow. So, if you'd like to pick up one of these cars on the way out, they will document them. I think the guys from the BIS team, at the bottom of the card there's an email address, and I think they'll have a copy of this presentation that they can email out. Is that right? Yes, that's right. If anyone wants it as a resource. And thank you for your time, and I hope you have learnt or at least been inspired by what's possible.